Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really zeroing in on a fascinating historical comparison.
Mm,
We're looking at communism in Malaysia, specifically under Jinping, and then comparing that to the communist movement in China. The one that eventually established the People's Republic.
right. Two movements, same roots in some ways, but wildly different endings.
Exactly. We've gone through some really interesting sources, and our goal here is to unpack, well, why one succeeded in taking power while the other sort of remained on the margins. Let's dive in.
Okay, well, straight away, you notice the shared foundations.
Yeah.
Both were definitely rooted in Marxist-Leninist ideology.
Right, the classic opposition to capitalism, advocating for class equality.
Exactly. And crucially, both were intensely anti-colonial. The Chinese communists fighting Japan, Western powers.
And Communist Party of Malaya, the CPM, pushing back hard against British colonial rule.
Yeah. And it wasn't just talk, was it? Both groups were ready for, well, armed struggle.
That's a key point. The CPM had the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army, the MPAJA.
And the Chinese communists famously had the Red Army.
And we should remember, they weren't operating in a total vacuum. There was international support, right?
Definitely moral support for sure, and sometimes, actual logistical help from places like the Soviet Union, and China itself even supported the CPM later on.
Okay, so they share ideology, anti-colonialism, even the tactic of armed struggle. But this is where the paths really seem to split.
Absolutely. The context, the environment they operated in was fundamentally different. Think about Malaya.
A British colony, multi-ethnic society, lots of different groups.
Precisely. That diversity, while a strength in many ways, made it really challenging for the CPM to create a single, unifying nationalist message that appealed to everyone. Mass mobilization needs that common ground.
Whereas China,
China was largely a hen-majority nation-state.
yeah,
Different ballgame. It was, relatively speaking, easier to tap into a shared sense of national identity against foreign influence.
so the operational context was just miles apart. How did that difference impact their actual support base?
Well, look at their goals and who backed them. The CPM wanted a communist state in Malaya, okay? But their support base was, frankly, quite limited, primarily within the ethnic Chinese community.
But the Chinese communists, they aimed bigger.
Much bigger, taking over the entire country, establishing the People's Republic, and they managed to build, well, really broad support. Especially crucial was the backing from the massive peasant population, the lower classes.
That disparity in just raw public backing seems absolutely pivotal then.
It really was.
Yeah.
And you see it reflected starkly in the outcomes.
Yeah, the CPM never took power. They ended up viewed by the British and then the Malaysian government as rebels, even terrorists. They remained a guerrilla force, largely underground.
While the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao, achieves this huge victory in 1949, they become the government.
Let's talk leadership and strategy, too. Jinping in Malaysia, Mao Zedong in China, both started with guerrilla warfare, which makes sense given their situation.
Right, asymmetrical warfare against a stronger power.
But the Chinese communists managed something the CPM didn't they? They shifted tactics.
Yes, that's a key strategic difference. They evolved. They moved from primarily guerrilla tactics
Right.
to large-scale conventional warfare when the time was right.
Yeah.
That's a transition the CPM just couldn't successfully make.
So if we pull back and look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
it seems like while the ideology, the starting point, the initial tactics like armed struggle were similar,
Uh-huh.
the actual success or failure really hinged on these other factors, the specific context they were in.
The local conditions, yeah.
Yeah.
The ethnic mix in Malaya versus China.
The level of public support they could actually get,
Crucial. Broad versus narrow.
how their strategy adapted or didn't adapt,
The move to conventional war in China, for instance.
and of course, how the ruling powers responded, considered rebels versus becoming the rulers.
Exactly. It boils down to the fact that the sociopolitical conditions, the strong nationalist wave in China, just provided much, much more fertile ground for that kind of revolution compared to what the communists faced in Malaya.
It really underscores how much local factors matter, doesn't it? Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to ponder, I suppose.
What's that?
Well, considering these two very different journeys stemming from similar ideas, what does this tell us about how critical that local context, those wider societal forces, really are in determining whether a revolutionary movement ultimately succeeds or fails, regardless of the core ideology driving it? Something to think about.